Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. This is a podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And of course, in order to do that, we have to talk about sustainable design as well. And I'm your host, Joe Menchefski. And I want to welcome a very special guest today. I have Tommaso Bitossi from Transsolar. Hello, Tommaso, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Joe. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Absolutely my pleasure. This is our second guest from Transsolar. We had Eric Olson on, I guess about this time last year, probably.
Probably.
Yeah. So this is wonderful. I'm glad to have our second guest. Let's learn a little bit about you before we dive in. Tell us why you became an architect in the first place and why you became so interested in sustainable design. But also, let's talk about the pathway that led you to become a partner at Transsolar.
Sure. So first of all, you are going to bear with me with my strong accent. And when I moved to North America, a colleague of mine, she said, you have to brand it, never lose it. And so I took her very seriously. And here I am with my accent. Anyway.
I married an Italian, by the way.
Great. So you're going to understand what I'm saying.
I'll be fine.
So back in time, I had a thing for math and physics, which you wouldn't probably expect from an architect. As a matter of fact, I started civil engineering. I wanted to apply the physics, I wanted to apply math. And then after my first year civil engineering, I got a bit bored. I needed to, at the time I said I need to be more creative. And later on, I understood that civil engineering is also creative. But anyway, I switched to architecture, and everybody at School of Architecture, they called me the engineer. So I was like applying science, and I wanted to do it in the construction industry. And sustainability, well, this goes back to the way I was raised by my parents. We always have been a very frugal family in a way, very careful about resources and trying to use as little as possible. And I think I just grew into it. And for me, that is the core of a sustainable design, to use just the right amount of resources. I remember when I moved to Germany, Transsolar is a German company in Stuttgart, our headquarters are there. I packed everything and I had 1.3 cubic meter of stuff. And I said, I try to stay that way. I don't know if I'm still there, but as close as possible. And then I joined Transsolar. I met a colleague of mine in Rome, and then I started my professional career into climate engineering, which is across architecture and engineering. And so it was a great fit. And then, as you hinted, lately I became partner, which was commitment, and I'm very happy and grateful I could become a partner, because I love my job, I love this company, and we want to keep this company internal. And so I was honored to give my contribution, and of course it was also an investment, let's put it this way, so to be pragmatic as I am.
Yeah, absolutely. So the time you spent in civil engineering, you weren't there long enough for them to surgically remove the right side of your brain.
Listen, I was there 1 year, and after 1 year, I told myself, I can't stay around engineers. These people are making jokes, so many stupid jokes. And here I am again. And every time I hear a colleague of mine, a core mechanical engineer, making a stupid joke, I'm like, why am I here? But, hey.
Oh, we've mastered the art of stupid jokes. There's no two ways about that. We've mastered that. All right, let's talk about your work. So, your work focuses on low carbon building design. And especially in the last few years, apparently you've been particularly interested in renovation and adaptive reuse projects. Let's say, how do you approach balancing, the preservation of the existing structure with the integration of these new modern energy efficient technologies? Tell me about the process.
Yeah. So, it's funny. I come from Florence. That's where I grew up. That's where I studied. And preservation there is very important. And I practiced in an architectural office for 5 years before starting my adventure in Transsolar. And we couldn't do anything there because of preservation. So, I mean, it's Florence, right? It makes sense. But I grew up with this idea of maybe too much is too much. Where do you draw the line? And anyway, I think renovation is extremely intriguing as a challenge, right? It's complex. But at the end of the day, the approach for me is the same as for a new building, right? It's that holistic thinking. You need to think of all the pieces together. And of course, in renovation, the pieces might be a bit more, but also less because the volume is already there. So you don't have to come up with something completely new. And compromising. And again, compromising, it's for both renovation and new buildings. For renovation, that's the tricky of compromising is when you have to compromise, you need to give different values to the same thing, looking at the same thing through different lenses. And the tricky part I see is that embodied carbon is still not valued enough. So the carbon emissions related to the construction or renovation of a building is not still valued enough. And that's why in the hierarchy of values and priorities, embodied carbon is always at the end. But what I always try to push for is we need to start thinking about renovation as something cool because it is, right? And usually everybody close to retirement always agree with me we shouldn't stop building, but then when I bring this to my students at universities, they always look at me like, do you want me to work on renovation? I want to build a new building, this is cool. So that's also my challenge. We need a shift. We need a cultural shift where we need to take care of our building stock. We need to give priority to that. And so that's my philosophical position. And then, of course, your question on technology is interesting. I want to turn it in a way the other way around because technologies and new technologies can actually help a lot with renovation. So, of course, I mean, if I think about an existing building which has no mechanical ventilation, and for some reason you want to have a mechanical ventilation system and fit it in, it's not going to be easy. But the other way around, there are many technologies that can really make renovation easy, especially if I think to insulation. There are new materials that can bring insulation inside, hygroscopic materials that can absorb humidity, and usually insulation inside is tricky because of condensation inside the layers. But also, especially in New York City now, there is a new technology, a window unit, which is a heat pump. It's not a chiller, but it's a heat pump doing heating and cooling, all electric, with a sash window, which though it doesn't need to be halfway open, you can close it and open it entirely. So it's a great technology and can really help renovation. So technology can be used to facilitate renovation. It's not a constraint necessarily. That's the way I see it.
You guys developed that technology, right? That was a Transsolar
Oh,
innovation?
I wish.
Oh, no, it's
Well,
not.
we
Okay.
we did some innovation there, and sometimes we help companies, and we have some similar systems, probably where you get confused about. But I'm really talking about a window unit, which, especially in New York, has received a lot of grants from the
Okay.
state. We weren't involved, but we are advocating for it for sure.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's interesting. I can't remember which guest said it, but somebody said that the most sustainable building is the one that already exists. Uh,
Absolutely. I'm sure many say that, which is true, which is absolutely true. Is there is that statement, and the other statement that everybody would say is that the best energy saving is the energy that you never use. Is the
right.
same thing. So starting without the need for building up a new material or using energy, that's the best way.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. I have to dive a little deep on something you said about embodied carbon. Why do you think embodied carbon is so far down the priority list relative to operational carbon?
Well, I don't know, but my guess, or maybe one of the reason, maybe that's not the only reason, is that we lack of a success metric. So energy savings now is very mainstream, right? Why would ever a client want to spend on insulation? Because they are gonna save energy. Energy is expensive, energy costs are fluctuating based on wars and whatever. And so that's a clear success metric. Resiliency is another success metric for energy savings or for less reliance on energy. Blackouts. But when I talk about embodied carbon, well, what's the success metric? And of course, the environment is the success metric. it's less palpable for the client. And so we always leverage on this is the right thing to do, which can
Right.
go to a certain extent. And I think the right success metric is going to come when we start being a bit more serious, because here and there we have these code requirements in Europe, Denmark, France, maybe also California here in North America, which is the price of carbon, right?
Right.
Is what is the price of carbon? And now some regulations, they require to have a certain limit of embodied carbon. And that's, in a way, I don't call it a success metric, it's a requirement, and that forces you to do it. And so we are still at the beginning in setting up a framework which is either pushing people to do it or make it as a mandatory requirement.
Right.
It's coming. We are not there yet.
Right. Yeah, we had a little experiment with carbon taxes here in Canada. Just had horrific timing on the implementation is really the biggest issue we had. We were struggling with inflation after COVID. We were struggling with a massive immigration that wasn't matched with, well, with anything, with housing. So the country was sort of in a little bit of a crisis. And then in the middle of the crisis, they introduced carbon taxes, and it
Just
did
to make it
not.
simpler.
It was just horrific timing, and it was one of the most despised taxes that we've ever seen here in the country. So anyway, personally, I'm actually glad it's gone because it was just such bad planning and implementation. But yeah, we'll probably get back there again. Let's talk about comfort a little bit. And I know that the building envelope and envelope performance is a key aspect of your personal expertise, Tommaso. How do these elements contribute to occupant comfort and well-being in the buildings that you design? Like, so the human aspect of a well-designed envelope.
Well, it's interesting because I have done some digging recently on renovation of residential buildings in New York City specifically. And one of the reasons why owners decide to improve the envelope is not for energy, but it's for comfort, which for me was very interesting. I always or mostly looked into envelope energy retrofit as a energy conservation measure, but instead, in real life, people are like, this envelope is leaky. I can't stay close to it. My curtains are moving when there is wind outside, and this window is so cold, I can't have a sofa close to my envelope. And so the envelope is essential for comfort, and we should start from there. And this is for renovation, but of course also new envelopes, especially in North America. And this is the beauty of, I always try to connect the dots. I never believe that Europeans are better or North Americans are better. I think we should work together. And I think historically in North America, the envelope was really just a thin layer in between indoor and outdoor. The thinner, the better, because you could have more area to sell. And then the mechanical system would do the rest. But this wouldn't end up being comfortable in a way. And so
Right.
exterior shading, performance of the glazing, those are all elements that, improve the overall experience close to the facade. And of course, I mean, we want to be close to the facade because that's where you see outside. That's what gives you the understanding of what time is it outside. So daylight, access to natural air. And, you know, we also want to rethink the idea of what an envelope is. We don't want to have this idea of a sealed box. So we always try, once we acknowledge the importance of it, to ask the question to our point before, or where is the envelope? Where do we need an envelope? What is indoor? What is outdoor? I'm sure Eric in the other episode mentioned the notion of mid-door. What is in between outdoor and indoor, right? Um, and so this is all driving at the end the design of a building, the experience of it. And then once you know where the envelope is and why you have it, you start thinking about the performance and what is it there for? And is a solar control and separation of cold versus warm, and also air tightness, wildfires. We really don't want to have that smoke coming in.
Right.
And that's the importance of it. It's not only energy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the smoke. I want to go somewhere with there just very briefly. The smoke, notwithstanding, do you ever seek to design with natural ventilation? It's obviously a popular trend for apparent reasons now. Is that part of your objectives, Tommaso?
I mean, we love natural ventilation wherever it makes sense for many reasons. And if it makes sense, we try to advocate for it. Now, in this last decade, wildfires are more of a known problem we not think about, right? And so in certain climates, like if I think about Vancouver, where if I look at the climate, that's heating in winter and in summer, you can get away with just natural ventilation.
Yep.
And you would think, why do I need cooling? Why do I need a mechanical ventilation system? And now the answer might be, well, because for 1 week or 2 weeks of the year, I need to filter the air coming from outside. And so we need to go hybrid sometimes because of wildfires. That's for sure.
Right. Well, let's talk about natural light too. You mentioned that earlier a little bit. Are you seeking to incorporate natural light wherever possible?
Wherever makes sense. Yes,
Okay. Okay.
absolutely. And there are
When
there are
does it not make sense? I have to ask that. I just have
ah,
to know.
I thought about it because it would be too easy to say it always makes sense. I have two examples in mind, which are a bit extreme. I was impressed years ago. I read this research on greenhouses. And in greenhouses in Canada, you would imagine that a greenhouse is the first place where you want to have natural daylight. But these greenhouses were for vegetation, for food production.
Yes.
That's the name. And so this research was saying, forget about natural daylight. What you have to do is to have a very thick envelope, very insulated, no natural daylight, which would require glass, hence a drop in the performance of the envelope, hence
Right.
more heating, and LED with UV properties to provide the UV light for the plant growth. So that's an extreme case where you might say, well, maybe there natural daylight just for food production is not needed.
Right.
Or something a bit more in between. We designed the headquarters in Sydney for Atlassian, the tech company. And there we back to the envelope and natural ventilation and where things make sense or not. We said, well, sometimes you want to be outside, sometimes you want to be in a daily office, but there are programmers or developers, they don't like light because then you get this reflection on your screen or glare. They just want to stay there 6 hours typing with no distraction. And we call these places the places for the nerds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe there you don't have to have natural daylight. And so we decided to have these spaces which are more in the center of a floor plate with less access to natural daylight, but then give possibility to people to get outside and have a meeting outside or in a terrace. This is a high rise I'm talking about. And so those are examples where perhaps daylight is not needed. But this is like 10%
Right.
of the building industry.
Right.
And we need to reframe and run away from deep floor plates where the center has no daylight. That's inhumane. And we have old buildings from the 70s designed that way. That's where renovation becomes tricky because how do you reverse a very deep floor plate? It's not easy.
Right. And do you get pushback from clients if you're trying to use a skylight, be it a curb skylight or an architectural skylight? Do you ever get pushback on recommendations when you have those large floor
Um,
plates to get light to the middle?
yeah, we do.
They just don't want the
We do.
holes in the roof. Is that the issue or?
Well, either for skylights, even for window or operable window for what matters. And it is the way I break it down is it's very cultural sometimes. So, in Germany, for instance, access to light, access to air, no brainer.
Right.
The window must be opened. North America is less open about that. Also for climate reasons, I mean, there are less opportunities to open a window in North America. It gets cold or dry or very humid.
Right.
And so there is that. And also it's not super known as a technology. An operable window is very innovative, and there is this fear of innovation, although it's ridiculous to talk about operable windows as an innovation. And so that is where sometimes you get pushback in having glass or even a floor plate which is not that deep, which becomes less efficient and less rentable. And so that's a bit the pushback sometimes we find. There is still this notion of this is the footprint I have. I want to have as many desks as possible.
Right.
To the extreme of once I work on a high rise in Italy, where I got pushed back in having operable windows from the unions. We are very strong with worker unions, must
Yeah,
confess,
yeah,
in Italy.
yeah.
And then once you have an operable window, you give control to people and people start, quote unquote, fighting one another.
Yes,
So
yes.
I have examples in Italy where the designer decided to go with the operable window and the owner locking the window with the key and throwing the key away, not to give this user opportunity, which is interesting.
Yeah, individual control is a big issue in terms of job satisfaction and satisfaction
Absolutely.
with place. So
Absolutely.
fascinating that someone was trying to take this away. Let's talk about a definition that I want to make sure I understand, or two definitions really. Transsolar emphasizes creating climate responsive rather than climate controlled spaces, right? And I think I know the difference, but let's make sure I understand. Can you explain the difference and maybe give us some examples to help us understand whether or not the same thing?
Well, okay. So a climate controlled, in my mind, is a mechanical system or overall a building which is overriding the climate. And so, you know, Dubai being the New York City in the desert, that is a climate controlled environment because you are ignoring that you are in a desert, you are designing a fully glazed building, and you are controlling that climate mechanically. A climate responsive is the opposite, is what is the climate and what is the right climate concept within that climate, which is the responsible thing to do for the environment, for even the owner, because at the end, building a climate responsive with a climate responsive approach is going to cost you probably less money in terms of capital cost, but also maintenance, sizing the system, etc. So that's the big difference. A climate controlled is ignoring the climate. A climate responsible is leveraging the climate.
Okay, so in your experience, how does the integration of climate responsive design principles impact the overall performance and human experience of the building? Like, what's the outcome when you switch from climate control to climate responsive?
Well, so for me, for us, a climate responsive design brings resiliency, first of all, because again, you are working with the climate, not against the climate. And we know that nature is much stronger than humans, and nature is coming back at us in these decades, making the point.
Mhm.
And so it's much more resilient. It gives you much more user engagement because, again, users are asked and tasked to engage with the building, depending on the climate outside as well. And so resiliency and engagement brings even more user satisfaction, as we were saying before. This has been proven by researches and post-occupancy evaluations, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, that's what you get. And if I think about in the 80s, in the 90s, we had these high rises, well, still now, unfortunately, with no operable window. If the mechanical system fails, and it is going to fail, you have to evacuate the tower because this tower is going to overheat, most probably. And that's not resilient, right? You try to control the climate. And, there is also this example of Katrina in New York City hospitals. They need to be more controlled, Not necessarily. Some parts of the hospital, yes, some others not. But then the generator failed. There was no electricity. The generator failed because it was underground, so flooding.
Right.
No operable windows. They had to evacuate the wards, and so that's what climate responsiveness brings. It's not just let's save the planet. Also, because we have to, is let's make buildings that they can stand alone as much as possible.
Oh, I love that. What a great quote. Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about the future a little bit. I want you to break out your crystal ball and tell us what innovations or emerging technologies in sustainable architecture that you're most excited about and how you see them shaping the future of, sustainable and human-centric building design.
Yeah, thinking about the future these days is particularly important, and we need to
Yeah.
really think about it in a positive way as much as possible. Technology, what is technology and what is innovation? I think this is something we need to ask ourselves
Mhm.
as much as possible. I think technology won't save us, and we need to be careful about that narrative of, the tech bros saying everything is gonna be fine. Let's just invest in PV panels, windmills, and electric cars and heat pumps, and we are gonna figure it out. I don't think that's the case. However, there are certain technologies that really can help us, and certain technologies that, in the right context, they can help us make things easier, right? And there are certain specific products like the heat pump I was mentioning before, which is, again, it's not a window unit, but is the same concept, which is very well known and can allow you to go all electric without very intensive work, which is what is slowing down electrification in New York, for instance. But there are also these, and mostly of this technology is going towards, in North America, towards electrification, right? This other example I have is an induction stove with a battery installed inside the induction stove, which allows you to install an induction stove within your apartment without redoing the electric system or rewiring or having a higher peak out of it because it's shaving the peaks. And so you just plug it in. You have
Right.
to do nothing else. You don't have to call Con Edison to change the meter or whatever they had to do, right? And so this is extremely easy. Electric vehicles, for me, this is also a great now mainstream technologies, which I think it's going to change forever the way we experience a city. Air quality is going to improve, noise is going to go down, and I think it's another extremely interesting technology. And then I really don't want to be that guy, but I have to. I love AI. I mean, I
Mhm.
love AI and large language models. I didn't at the beginning, and now I started playing with it as much as possible. And I think there is a lot of potential there. I don't think AI at the moment, or these large language models, they will be designers. But for instance, the way I look at it is it's a big knowledge bucket, or, a way of organizing big data. We are overloaded with data at the moment, and I constantly use these models to dig up knowledge that I already digested in the past so I can manage, but sometimes I don't remember. And so just tasking ChatGPT or whatever the right way, this knowledge resurface up, and it's an extremely interesting tool, even for code compliance. I mean, we work all over the world. We can't know all the code everywhere. And if used properly, you can just task your model and to get the answer that would have taken you so long just to do a research about it. So I'm very excited about it. And, there is a lot of different branches or how to use it properly. And I think we can screw it up royally as we usually do, humans, but we can also leverage on it and make something very interesting out of it.
Yeah, we screw it up and then we bring it back, and then it follows this kind of
We are chaotic. We are
loopy thing.
humans.
Yeah, it goes into chaos and then we calm it down. That's sort of how it
Yeah,
goes. Hopefully, it won't go so far into chaos that we lose control. But hey, because
we
there's
shall
just so
see.
much good there, it's worth taking that managed risk for sure. I want to talk a little bit about an initiative within Transsolar called Transsolar World Academy, which I believe is a new name or a recent name change.
That is correct.
Why was the academy created? What were you hoping to achieve? And then how do you go about achieving those goals?
So the academy is very close to my heart.
Yeah.
So I really have great memories with it. And our first day of the academy in 2013 was my first day in Transol as an intern. So the ideation of the academy was around 2012, I think, 1 year before I joined the company. And we did these symposiums in Stuttgart where after, I want to say, 15 years of the company was going, we said, so what did we achieve? What are we doing? And so we were gathering all our collaborators, architects, people we were working with, and asking these sort of questions. And one of the outcome of that exercise was ultimately we need to scale up what is environment of designers, which has a very little impact. And when we talk about the architects we work with and the projects we work with, they are roughly 2% of the entire building industry. And so to have a bigger impact, we need to scale up this sort of thinking. And so we said, what is the best way of doing it? Education. That's how it started. And so we said, what should we tackle? Again, in this idea of scaling up. And we said the minority words, which actually we didn't want to name that way, but we renamed it following an already existing definition as majority words because they are the biggest countries, India, Asia in general, Africa, growing in population and expanding and building. And so we said we need to start a conversation with these countries. And so we established this scholarship where we were inviting 6 students per year for 1 year and really sharing with them what we were doing as climate engineers and our understanding of climate responsive design. And they would bring us their understanding of climate responsive design in their own countries. Because we know that climate responsiveness is all about responding to what I would now call, quoting our founder Matthias Schuler, the local identity of a space, which is climate, but also culture. And there is no way you understand the culture until you dig into it. And so we started the program, and after a couple of years, for many reasons, I took over the logistics of it and the organization of the program. That's why it's very close to my heart. And I ran the program for 3, 4 years before I came to North America. The pandemic hit, and we couldn't invite students anymore. It was very tricky. And so we said, what if we reverse the concept? And so we called it Transsolar World Academy. And we decided instead of engaging with students coming to Stuttgart, we started engaging with students from Stuttgart to the universities in Africa, and now we are in India. And so we targeted specific universities and we started working with them. And this is where we are at the moment.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. I love it. Okay, we're at the part of the show where I ask the $1,000,000 question, Tommaso.
Huh?
All right. And the $1,000,000 question, I ask it every episode, and I ask people to respond from whatever perspective they'd like. Okay.
Great.
So the $1,000,000 question is, what makes a great building?
So does that mean that if I answer properly, I get $1 million?
Probably not. No, I don't think I have the budget quite for that yet, but maybe someday we'll.
You made me dream for a sec. Okay, what makes a great building? You know, I have to tap into my architectural background here and answer with that lens. And who knows me know that I'm always switching between being an architect and an engineer, depending on what is more convenient at the moment.
Yep.
I think, at the end, buildings are for people. And if people are happy, that is a great building. So, happiness is a tough concept philosophically to define. And it's interesting that satisfaction is not happiness, but Asher is defining a great building as, well, if 20% of the occupants don't complain, that's a great achievement. So that's happiness for Asher. And, we always recommend our clients to do post-occupancy to measure satisfaction. So that for me is one reason to think about a building as a great building. Users are happy, sick days go down, people go back to the office because their space is great. And I always think about it, let's not overthink it. Let's not make going back to the office mandatory. Let's just design a space which is so comfortable and beautiful to be in that you want to go back. Now, from an urbanistic perspective, I think also what makes a building great is, or the built environment. You gotta build something and end up with an environment which is better than before. And that's another reason for me to understand or think about a building as great. Now, again, defining success and better than before is not easy. That is always where I always get in trouble in my profession. And I remember once a client, we were working on a project in Winnipeg, and we had this market, which was basically a transparent box. And a client told me, how can you endorse this design? And I said, glass is not great as a construction material, but I really understand the urbanistic value of having transparency in this specific case, because it would have made that environment better from an urbanistic perspective. And so, that is for me a bit what a great building is. And of course, and here I stop with the answer, it would be the less use of resources as possible. And so let's make existing buildings great again. Sorry, I couldn't help it. But that is also something that we should do, right? For me, adaptive reuse, reusing a building and making it a great building, that's the best thing we could do.
I love it. All right, before we go, do you have any big news that you'd like to share, Tommaso, and any personally or for Transsolar, or anything that you'd like to promote that we haven't talked about?
Probably something else I'm personally proud of after the academy was to work on the Transsolar carbon neutral plan. And for a company like Transsolar, coming up with a carbon neutral plan is not an easy piece of cake. That's why it took us some time to figure it out. We wanted to do it properly, as better as possible. And so we worked through this with a bigger group in the company, and I was leading the group, and we came up after just 5 years of discussions with a plan. And so we deployed the plan last year, and we offset our emissions from 2023, which is great. And in the process, what I really loved is that this new generation of employees we have, they're really asking for it, for being accountable and responsible and consistent with what we do. And I think it was a great process, and now we need to keep doing it, and we keep doing it every year, of course. And I'm very proud of it for the company.
Fantastic. Tommaso, it's been an absolute pleasure. I learned a lot and had a couple of good laughs there too, which I very much appreciate. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You take care.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans.
For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.